So I thought it might be a good idea, whilst dealing with the ships and the stations, the planets, the environment of the show, that I think it might be a good idea to actually talk about some of the design process that actually led to where the design and the look of the universe is for Rosco Berry. So what I thought I'd do is take a look at the Ticon and how I ended up with the Ticon being the shape and design that it actually is. So let's get straight into it, and let's talk about the design process that I went through to get to where the Ticon is. So the first design that I'm going to show you is this one, and this design, there's no two ways about it. I was sort of redesigning my Millennium Falcon. So it was going to be a ship that I wanted to be a salvage ship that could pull cargo, that could be this nice design ship. It had a bridge, it needed a crew, it had quarters, it had all these sorts of things on it. It was somewhere between the Millennium Falcon and Firefly, and with bits of Star Destroyer thrown in. And as I was thinking about it, it was just like, this doesn't fit. This doesn't fit the universe that I want. And when I rejected this idea, it was a case of, right, so what is wrong with this idea? And that led me to the point whereby I was thinking about the character and who the character was, and why the character, what was the point of this character, what was the purpose of the owner of this ship. And this person works in salvage, and this person works in the hind end of space. And why the hind end of space? Because I wanted this to be an isolated part of space. I wanted it to be a part of space that, it's so distant from Earth that you don't ever have to get back to Earth. That you can do all these different stories set on different planets, set on different worlds. So I decided that it was going to be out in the middle of nowhere, and I thought, well, if this person's out in the middle of nowhere, maybe they're not earning as much money. And that led me to the fact that this ship was no good for that reason, because if you've got a ship like that, you've probably got money. So this idea was then rejected. I still keep the idea for the ship. I mean, it's useful. It's a good idea. I like the design. It's just that it's just not for Rosco. Rosco just doesn't have that sort of cash. Which led me to the idea of, well, maybe I should make the ship smaller, a lot smaller. And what could this guy afford? If this guy is working for himself, maybe he can't afford a big spaceship. Maybe he can only afford a van, And then that led me to this design, which was a lot smaller. I mean, this was a tiny design for the Ticon, and it definitely shaped the way the ship turned out, and a lot of the decision making and the rationale behind why the Ticon became the ship that it becomes was because of this snap decision to make the ship a lot smaller. Now this ship again was okay, but it was not suitable, because it led me down the idea that, well, this person's going to live in this ship. This isn't just a ship to this person, this is a home. And so, whilst I was okay with the design of the ship, it looked a bit too, too much like a semi, particularly the front end. So, but it was just the fact that, could you see yourself sort of living in this thing, and could a person reasonably, use this ship to work out of? And then obviously I made the addition of the side pods there, and I wasn't entirely sold on the side pods, so there was a bit of back and forth with that. So, but I thought, well, I like the idea of it. I'm just really not keen on the front end looking so much like a truck. So maybe I should push that into a little bit of a different shape. And again, I wasn't so keen on the side pods. So what I did then was I did one without the side pods and made it a lot smoother, a lot more refined, which led me to this design. And this was kind of like a nice little sort of ship. Again, it had similar features to the first one, where it has this sort of underslung, almost cannon kind of thing underneath the main body. The side pods are gone, and it's smoother, but it's a little too clean, and it really, when I finished rendering this out, it was like, do you know, it kind of makes me think ambulance, and that of course pays into part of the lineage of the Ticon in its in-universe history then. But it was a little too neat, it was a little too clean. It didn't look like it could pull anything. It looked like it was more of a shuttle than an actual serviceable vehicle. There's nothing wrong really with the design of it. It's just the fact that it just doesn't say this belongs to a guy who works for, or works at a salvage yard, or works for a scrapyard. But it did leave me to have a rethink as to, maybe what could I do with this design? How could I take this design and make it work? How could I take this design and make it what it needed to be? So I got a piece of paper and then I drew this. And this was, integrating multiple ideas. It was taking ideas from the first design. It was taking ideas from the second design, integrating the pods, introducing greebles into the recessed sections. I cut the thing in half and put a crane grabbing system in the middle, and then put the engine's drive section on the back. That again was something that I helped inform on the Ticon, because the Ticon is an amalgam ship and part of the ship comes from one place, part of the ship comes from another place. It was literally made out of bits of ship that were chopped up and put together. But then I did do a CG version of this just to give me some sort of idea, as just a bit more refinement. And this was the version that now again, this was only similar to what I had drawn. The drawing was a bit more detailed, but this was sort of me taking the design that I'd already built in CG and sort of extending it and trying to turn it into what I had drawn. And I think for the most part this sort of works for a design. You can see there that the crane in the middle is extendable, so the whole ship extends in and out, so that you can pick up different sized cargo and different sized salvage. That it could actually extend, the back of the ship could extend out 30-40 feet. I could grab large amounts of cargo. It's got big engines on it, so it could pull. But then it just looked like, I don't know, it just looked like more of a ship than something. Again, it didn't look like something you could live in. It just looked like something that you could use for working in. And it looked, again, the shape of the ship looked a little too clean, a little too sterile. Again, it's one of those designs whereby I think, oh, I could use it, but just not for the Ticon. It's what this is and what this was a step in the right direction, but still way off the mark. So I thought, well, what is actually wrong here is the fact that what I need is the ship to be a transit van. And this still says is way too big for that. This is still far too big. I need a transit van with a ball hitch. That's what I need. And so I thought, right, let's design something that's a lot smaller. And I ended up with this design, which is it's pap. Okay, I'm going to admit this design is, the engines are massive, and it's clearly you can't live in this thing. This thing was meant to dock wherever it was gonna go. But this was just a tugboat. That's what this was. This would pull ships in and out. The engines were massive. It made sense that this would be this way. It's a tugboat. And again, this also helped inform on the Ticon, because the front cab of the Ticon is made from a G-class tugboat. Not this one. This one is not a G-class. Clearly it's got a different front, a different cab. But this did, again, it informed on the design. It was like, well, Jesus, these engines are huge. You know, for the size of this ship, this must be able to pull a lot of weight. And what if you took the engines off this and put them onto your normal size ship? You would end up with a ship that was just way overpowered, and I didn't want the Ticon to be overpowered. The Ticon is not that sort of ship. Again, it's a transit van with a ball hitch. That's what the Ticon is. So that led me then to draw a quick thumbnail then of the ship that I just wanted. It was a case of, what does this ship need that you can absolutely say, right, let's just draw what this ship needs and nothing else. So it needed a live-in space, it needed a cockpit space, it needed a crane, it needed engines, it needed a place for fuel, it needed a place for a faster than light drive, it needed all these things, and it needed a winch and a hitch. So all those things were drawn in quickly and into a thumbnail like this. But then I did a much larger design of that version, which is this. And this was, this was by far the closest thing to the final result of where I was going with the Ticon. There's clearly space in there for the back section, for the sleeping quarters, the sleeping area. There's a space in the front for the cockpit. It was a little too mean looking though, and I really liked how stubby it was and how chunky it was. It definitely sort of said transit van to me, but it was a little too, the front end is just a little too mean looking. And the Ticon, again, it's not that sort of ship. The Ticon it's a workhorse, but it's not a fighter. It's a strong ship, but it's a Land Rover. It's not a tank. So so that led me then to coming up with, well, how can I redesign this front end so that it's still got a similar sort of styling, and it still works with the Ticon, with the rest of the ship. But now what I'm doing here is stripping out things. It's taking off things that I don't think it needs. And one of the things that I wanted to get rid of was the hard front end. And what I thought of was a Ford Galaxy. And when I did that, it was a case of, right then, how do I design the cab around this? Well, start off with the person, because a person's got to fit inside this. So what I did was I drew a person in a seated position, drew exactly where the floor needed to be, and then I drew the size of the cab that I wanted around it. Now there is a design that I did, but which I don't have. I put it somewhere and I can't find it. but it was literally right around the shape of the person. It looked like an astronaut wearing a spaceship on his back instead of a backpack. But then that ended up with this shape for the cab. Well, then the next step then was to say, well, how tall is this person? Well, let's take this person as being 6 foot tall. So then I had to extend the floor. So the floor extended downwards instead of from behind the seat. The floor extended downwards so that when this person could stand up. And then I said, well, if this person's 6 foot, then the door is 6'6". So, because the door needs to be bigger. And then how much bigger is the roof? Well, the roof is 8 foot. So if the roof is 8 foot, then the cab needs to be this size. And then that ended up with me coming up with what is essentially the final cab for the Ticon, and also the airlock hatch as well, the size of the airlock hatch, because if you look in the previous design, the airlock hatch is much smaller. But once I come up with the scale and built it in CGI, I was able to scale everything to that person, and that scale size led to all the shapes of everything on the ship then fitting into place. So yeah, the size of the person determined on how big the cab was going to be, how big the cockpit was going to be, how big the sleeping quarters were going to be. It determined, you know, sort of the working area inside the cab, the amount of space that you were going to need for clothing, for food, for all that sort of stuff, and particularly because it's a living space, not just a working ship. But then once I'd worked out that, it also gave me a size that I could scale the ship down to, because the scale of the ship was that I still felt it was too big. And so once I was able to work out the size of a person in comparison to how big things were, I could start reducing the size. And once I did that, I actually ended up with the size of a ship that worked out as 44 feet. And of course, once I did that, the hatch on the side of the ship became much bigger, because I needed a 7 foot hatch or a 6'6" hatch, and then that determined where the ceiling was, where the floor was. I worked out all the internal components for the ship as well. So this needs a gravity generator, it needs a place to produce oxygen, it needs all these sorts of things. The fuel, it's got a big engine on an FTL engine on the back of it. It needs some sort of drive system for that. It needs, all these things were taken into consideration when coming up with the ship. And I mean, even small things like for example, I've put the bed on one side of the ship, and so on the outside of the ship, where I've decided that the crane is going to go, I've actually put a steel plate over the side of the ship, so it looks like the guy who, when he was making the ship, decided to weld a steel plate over that side so it would block the window. And he could fit the crane into place. He put a thicker steel plate because he was supporting the crane. So these little things just ended up informing on the ship. They ended up informing on the design. It also made the ship asymmetrical in its design. But what I found was that even though it had a bloody big crane on one side of the top and a bloody big door at the side, the ship still looked balanced. And I think that's really what works with the design. It's asymmetrical, which makes it look functionable, but it's still, it has enough symmetry to it to make it it looks pretty enough that you can get away with, even though the side pod engines are oversized because they're meant to be, because again, it's a design of a ship that is made up of multiple parts from different ships. But that idea all spawned from the fact that the earlier design was that you know, I said he looked like an ambulance, and then when I chopped it up, it was like, well, maybe I made the ship out of bits of ambulance and bits of boat and bits of other ship and you know, tugs and all that sort of stuff, and that's all that informed on this, and the importance of that on this design also informed on the rest of the universe that this takes place in. You know, why does this person need that? Because nobody has any money. Why doesn't anybody have any money? Because, and then I started thinking about things like, you know, well, you know, maybe there was something like the Lehman Brothers crash in 2008, and you know, maybe there was an economical financial crash. Maybe people pulled out. You know, we go through this period now with Brexit now, whereby companies are leaving Britain because they don't feel like there's market stability. So all these sorts of things are running through my head, and then that's informing on, you know, coming up with this design for the Ticon. Didn't just inform on the character and on the ship and the environment, but all the other things. You know, why Moonrise is the way it is, why the bar is the way it is, why, you know, it led me to designing the Buccaneer and leading me down that line of, well, I want this thing to look like, you know, a locomotive. So the Buccaneer is this big blocky design for a ship. So yeah, going through this design process didn't just help me design this ship, but it also left me with a lot of other designs that I can use, not necessarily for this, but, you know, for other ships maybe in the universe. And it also led me to, you know, expanding my ideas on what I could do with stories and where this can go. And, you know, just thinking about, you know, what this ship needed and why it needed it led to not just the backstory on the ship, but actually the backstory on the character and, again, everything else in the universe. So yeah, but in the end we ended up with the Ticon the way it is. And the colour scheme for the Ticon, I decided to choose the yellow colour scheme because it's a bold colour scheme that really sort of stands out against, you know, most other ship colours, because most ship colours in science fiction tend to be a grey. So I decided to go with something that was a bit more bold. And then because the ship is a workhorse, I was thinking about what I thought about when I think about work in vehicles, and I tend to think about things like, you know, dump trucks and earth movers and things like that, and then that leads me to thinking about a company like Finn and Cat and those colour schemes, and then that colour then played heavily into, well, really that's what the Ticon is. So and yeah, that colour scheme kind of does say working vehicle to me. So anyway, that's how I come up with the design for the Ticon, and how the design for the Ticon ended up helping me create the universe.